Okay, I think we're going to get started. So good morning. Thank you for coming to this session. I'm Tony Vernon. I'm the co-editor-in-chief of Personality and Individual Differences.
My name is Kanter-Schlifke. I'm publisher at Elsevier, and I'm the publisher of Paid specifically, and other journals in the psychology portfolio as well.
So we're just going to go back and forth. We've got quite a few slides to go through. This is going to be a fairly introductory, basic presentation covering basically everything you'd need to know if you've never published an article before, which many of you probably have, but hopefully there'll be some useful information, a few tips that will come in handy, and we're just going to go back and forth between the two of us, and Irene's going to start off.
Yeah. And please feel free to ask questions in between. Of course, at the end there will also be time to ask questions, but we try to make this as interactive as possible. And maybe to start with, I would like to ask you all, who of you has already published an article? Okay, most of you. So most of you know what it's all about. Who has published 3 or more articles? Also quite a few. So
you can leave.
Yeah, or come up here. Okay, well, those of you who have already been through the process of publishing, you know that when you submit an article, it goes to the editor, and then the editor sends it out for peer review if it's deemed appropriate, so if it fits the scope of the journal and so on. And then you have the peer reviewing process where you have experts in the field giving feedback on your article. And this model, so the peer review, is something that is quite old. It was sort of invented in the 17th century by the Royal Society in London. And since then, this concept has really taken off. As you see here, the growth of journals that use this peer review. And in 2011, we had about 30,000 active reviewed journals in the world. Now, when you submit an article, you have contact with the editor, you have indirect contact with the reviewers, and you probably have contact with somebody from the publishing house. But what you don't see is the big machinery that is behind all this, and all these people that are actually involved behind the scenes. So that's why, I just want to give you some idea of the numbers that we're dealing with. And this is just for Elsevier now, since, I'm from Elsevier, so I know those numbers. So we have about 2,000 journals with about 7,000 editors managing those journals. And different journals have different setups. Smaller journals have one editor and an editorial board that helps him or her, and other journals can have several layers of editors, and we will talk about the example of Paid later on. There are about 70,000 editorial board members that support the editors, more often as reviewers, and in addition, even more reviewers, about 500,000 reviewers. And from all the articles that we get submitted, depending on the subject area and the specific journal, 40 to 90% approximately are actually being rejected eventually. So you see, even if an article is rejected, there's already a lot of work behind it. And then those articles that are accepted, they will come into the production. About 500,000 new articles are produced each year. And in the late 1990s, when everything was moved online, there was also a big effort to scan everything that had been published on paper the hundreds of years before that. So, but this is, of course, now done. And you can find, for any publisher, when you go online, you will see the back issues as well. Now we have about 10 million articles online, and 30 million researchers that access them and download about 480 million articles per year. Now, as I said, let's talk a little bit more about a specific example, which is Paid. And maybe Tony can say some words.
Sure. So Paid receives about 1,200 submissions every year. As of last night, I got article number 700. So we may get a few more this year. And our acceptance rate's around 30%. So we reject, obviously, about 70% of the articles that we get submitted. We put out 16 issues every year. And Paid really prides itself on a pretty quick turnaround. The first decision which would be me deciding whether or not the article is going to be accepted and sent out for review. And then if it's going to be sent out, I assign it to one of my associate editors. We'll do that certainly within the first week, sometimes within a day or two. And we encourage our reviewers to submit their reviews within 4 weeks. So on average, assuming the reviewers actually do respond on time, authors should know the status of their manuscript submitted to paid within about 4 to 5 weeks, which is pretty good. As you can see here, most of our articles that are submitted come from North America or Western Europe. We also get articles from around the world. Increasingly these days, we're getting more and more articles submitted from Asian countries. And so here is the editorial boards of PAID. Obviously, I'm the editor-in-chief along with Sybil Isink, the wife of Hans Isink, who founded the journal back in the 1980s. We have quite a few associate editors, 16 associate editors who are experts in a variety of different fields, and those are the people who end up handling most of the papers, although I do handle some myself. We also have an editorial advisory board with about 40 members. These are people who have done a number of reviews, high-quality reviews for PAID in the past, and to become a member of the editorial board, you agree to handle about, to review maybe a dozen or so papers every year. And then, of course, you've met Irene, and the production or journal manager, Latha, handles all of the technical details.
Now let's talk a little bit about the trends in publishing. As I mentioned already that in the 1990s everything was moved online, and this has really been a revolution for a lot of industries, but also for publishing. So, you know, this is what we were used in the good old days, and nowadays it looks more like this. So this is how we now find information, process information. So with the move online, it has been easier to submit manuscripts, which also increased the number of manuscripts that we receive because it's simply easier and quicker. It's easier to find articles. People use them in a different way. They don't read them from the top to the bottom. They really select, you know, the bits of information that they need from the different sources, including articles. And it's easier to share material online. And there are also different publishing models that have emerged, such as open access, for example. And in addition to that, one of the things that we are doing as a publisher is very much trying to redefine how people use the information and make it more user-friendly and more individual. So for example, here you see an example of a figure that maybe somebody wants to see different information in it. So this is what is now, you know, shown in the article. Or you can have a video in your article, and this is this is maybe something that is more relevant for your area, and something that I also, you know, always want to encourage people to do, that you actually take advantage of these kind of things that we can do nowadays. So, you know, go away with your mind from the paper version and the PDF version and really think of, you know, how can I enrich my article for people that use it online, such as with videos. And another example that I wanted to mention here specifically is this, which is called audio slides. And this is a very brief presentation you can do, and we have a platform for that, and you can also do for paid. And it's basically a PowerPoint presentation with a voice-over recording where you can really talk, you know, in a more personal way and describe what the work that you have written up as the article is really about. And for all of you who have submitted an abstract to this conference, there will be publication of the abstracts in paid, and there will be the option to do those audio slides as well. And yeah, I really encourage everybody to take advantage of that as well.
If I could just interject, just to put this into perspective, over 1 million people access paid alone online versus about 300 get the hard copy. So virtually no one's reading the hard copy anymore.
Yeah, and that's the trend for all
Exactly.
journals, of course, yeah. I think, yeah, if you want to take one.
So you may have a number of different reasons why you want to publish an article. You may be en route to your PhD, you may be hoping to get funding, you may be hoping to get promoted, any number of reasons. But it's important to realize that editors and reviewers and the research community at large really don't care what your motivations are. They're just interested in the quality of your article. And it's also important to recognize that your articles really are your passport to the research community. By that we mean that if you publish high quality papers, the research community is going to take notice of you. People are going to perhaps invite you to participate in a symposium at the next Issid conference. They may invite you to write a book chapter for an upcoming volume. I will be going around the poster sessions today and tomorrow, and it's quite likely that I will be asking people at the poster sessions to submit their works to paid. You want to get published. I, as an editor, want to publish high quality research, so I'm actively seeking out people to publish their works in paid. And so it really is an important gateway for you to take part in. So an interesting thought question for you to think about is, what is it that distinguishes an excellent article from a poor one? You've obviously all read lots of articles yourself, and as you're reading papers, you think to yourselves, wow, this is a really good paper, or why did this thing ever get published? And what is it what are the criteria that you think about when you're making that sort of an evaluation? And amongst other things, a good paper has to have good content. It should be useful, it should be exciting, it should be making a novel, perhaps a major contribution to the field. It really has to grab your attention. It also has to have a good presentation, though. It has to be well written, it has to have a logical, good flow. All of those things go into making a good research paper. So you're ready to get started. You've got an idea for a research project, you're thinking of a study that you want to do. You'd be quite surprised how often I get an article submitted to paid, and I'm reading it and I'm thinking, well, this was done in 1980, and the person thought they had a great new idea, and they just didn't find out that in fact this was not a new idea at all. It was just not even a replication, because they thought they'd come up with something new themselves, and they're submitting it. So obviously, this should go without saying, but unfortunately it has to be said, because it is quite surprising how often I will get articles submitted which are just rehashes of stuff that's already been done. So you need to go through things and find out if you actually are doing something that's new and interesting and is making a novel contribution. Are you challenging anything in your work? Are you challenging an established dogma or some theory that's out there for a long time? Is your work directly related to a current hot topic? That's not essential, but again, as an editor, I'm really keen to find new papers that are addressing current hot topics in the field of personality. And if your answers are yes to some or most of those questions, then you're ready to go ahead and start preparing your manuscript. As you probably know, there's a variety of different types of articles that you might be interested in writing. Full research articles. With paid, we have a 5,000 word limit, but that allows people to write up their papers and make a good contribution. We also invite people to write shorter communications. If people have done a pilot study, paid is interested in papers that are about 3,000 words or less, which isn't much. It's only about 10 typewritten pages. We also publish letters to the editor if you just want to make a really brief comment on an article that's been written. And we also invite review papers, which can be up to 10,000 words. When I first started as an assistant professor, I set a goal to myself to write at least one review article or book chapter a year. It really made me keep abreast of what was going on in the field. It made me read more than I might otherwise have done and to make detailed notes of things that I was reading. And people tend to shy away from review articles. They're onerous. They take a lot of work, but I think they're really worthwhile. And I wish that actually we would get more submissions to paid, which were not just empirical articles. Of course, we appreciated empirical articles, but we also like review articles. Oh, sure, yeah. So again, just you want to be up to date and to know what's going on in your area, so that you can be publishing up to date work. So obviously, it's also important when you are writing a paper to decide where the most appropriate place is for you to submit it. As an example, suppose you've written a paper with the title Personality Predictors of Drug and Alcohol Abuse Among Children and Adolescents. That might go to paid, because it does deal with personality predictors. It might also go to addictive behaviors. You need to make the decision as to what the most appropriate journal is for your paper, and also whether it's of local or international interest. And also to think, well, what's the editor going to think about this? Is the editor of the journal that I've chosen going to think that this is an appropriate paper for his or her journal? Mike Curtis, the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Pharmacological and Toxicological Methods, said that the most important issue is to maximize the visibility of your work. And by that, we don't necessarily mean publishing your work in the most broad international journal that there is. If your paper is quite focused and deals with a quite specific topic, in a wide international journal, people may not read it. You may get more readership if you send it to a journal which deals with that specific issue that you're writing about.
And when talking about choosing the right journal, of course, we cannot dismiss the impact factor, which is something that everybody looks at. So I just wanted to talk briefly about that as well. I think everybody knows what the impact factor is, but just to remind you how it is being calculated, it takes the number of citations given in a certain year to the articles published in the 2 years before that, divided by the number of articles in those 2 years. So for example, if 100 articles published in 2010 and 11 would receive 200 citations in 2012, the 2012 impact factor is 2 for that journal. Now it's important to realize that impact factors and citations overall are different in different subject areas and depend on the way that research is being done, on the frequency that publications come out, and also the citation behavior. In some areas, there are restrictions of how many references are in an article, whereas in other areas, it's very common to have huge lists of references. And of course, that means that in some areas there are less citations than in others, and the average impact factor will be different. It does not say anything about the actual quality of these areas. And here just, a collection of different ones. For example, cell biology, the average impact factor is above 3. And then you have transportation science at the other end, where it's not even 1. It does not mean that transportation science is bad science compared to cell biology. So and this is something that seems very obvious, but a lot of people often forget about it. And even within psychology, if you look at the range of impact factors of individual journals, you see that it's quite broad. And probably these journals up here, I have not looked at them, but they are probably reviews journals. And this brings me to the next slide that describes that different article types are also cited in different ways. And reviews have a steeper curve and are in general more often cited because they are such a collection of knowledge that people can refer to. Notes are often sort of, short communications, types of articles that describe something sort of hot and new in a very quick way, and can also have a steeper curve of citations. And then we have the regular research articles. Something very important to bear in mind, an impact factor tells you about the average number of citations to an article in a specific journal. It does not tell you anything about the quality of a specific article in that given journal. You can have a journal that has, where the 5 top articles are cited 1,000 times, and then all the other articles are never cited. That's of course an extreme example, but in reality we see a long tail of uncited articles. So don't judge an article by the impact factor of the journal where it's published. And this is just to give you a sort of practical, funny example where we did an analysis of actually one of the editors that I worked with in the past, and we looked at the impact factor of the journals that he had been publishing in for a couple of years, and then we gave him a sort of personal impact factor by looking at the citations for his own articles. And as you see, in more at the beginning of his career, his articles were actually less well cited, so people might have thought, oh, but they were published in a good impact factor journal. Whereas at the end of it, or later on in his career, his articles were actually better cited than the average in the journals that he published in. So just to make again the point, don't judge an article by the impact factor of the journal where it's being published. And this goes also the other way around. Whenever you choose a journal, don't choose the journal simply based on impact factor. Don't descend the stairs, as we say. Don't go from top to bottom in terms of impact factor. What is much more important, as Tony already said, is that you reach the right audience, that the people that you want this article to see, that they actually see this article. So you have to look at the audience of a journal. You should look at what topics is this journal currently publishing, so that gives you also an idea of who looks at the journal and who publishes in the journal, what are the topics that are interested at the moment, and what types of articles are published in this journal, and does it fit with what you want. And then of course you have, every journal has a journal homepage with the description, with the aims and scope that describe what the journal is about. For many journals you will know it already because you read them regularly, but still it's good always to have this as a reminder.
Okay, thanks. So, as Irene's saying, it's important to choose the correct journal, and if you're new in this field, definitely avail yourself of whatever assistance you can get. Talk to your supervisor if you're still a PhD student, talk to your co-workers if you're a new assistant professor. A related topic is when you're submitting your article, please be sure never to submit it to more than one journal at a time. Apart from anything else, international ethics standards prohibit that, and if editors discover that you have submitted your article simultaneously to a second or a third or more journal, they will automatically reject it. And there's a very high probability that they'll find out, if for no other reason, in that it's quite likely that they'll send your article to one or more of the same reviewers, and of course as soon as a reviewer receives an article from 2 or more journals, they're going to alert the editor, and the editor's going to know. So just don't ever do that. It's just not worth the gamble. So in deciding which journal is the most appropriate one from you, every journal, of course, has a guide for authors which details exactly what sorts of papers they're interested in receiving. So read that and make sure that you adhere to those guidelines. If you don't, again, it's probably just going to be rejected out of hand, or at best it's going to be sent back and you'll be asked to revise it. Just as an aside, we're going to go through some of these slides quite quickly and not cover everything that's on there, but this entire presentation will be made available to you after the session, so you can go through it at your leisure. So, as you're probably all aware, the general structure of a typical research article is going to be very similar to what you probably did for your thesis. You're obviously going to have a title, an abstract, and keywords. We'll get into the keywords a little more later on. Then, of course, the main text is going to have the introduction, the method section, the results, the discussion section. and then followed by conclusions, possibly acknowledgements, and of course the references and supplementary data. And again, we'll talk about supplementary information a little later. And your final article, I think you were going to do this, yeah?
So the final article that you will publish will tell a story, basically. It will have an introduction that is rather general, that puts your research into context. Then you will be more specific. You will describe your results, what you have exactly done and what you have found. And then you will become general again and put your results into context and what it actually means. So this is how the story will look like in the end. But to get there, you actually start in a different way. You usually don't start by writing the title of your paper, but you start with your data. You start with your figures and tables, that's what you have, and then based on that, you build up your text. You write the methods, that's the easy part. You might write the results next, that's also fairly easy. Discussion already becomes a bit more difficult, and once you have that, you come up with the introduction and the conclusion. And this way you build the paper from the bottom to the top, in a way, to, in the end, come to this.
So there's some issues regarding who should and who should not be listed as a co-author on a paper. A number of criteria are out there and are sort of accepted as the appropriate criteria for deciding who should be an author. And basically, to be listed as a co-author, you should have made a fairly substantial contribution either to the design of the study or to the collection of the data or to the data analysis and to the write-up of the paper. You have to give your approval that the paper is something that you have contributed to. If you haven't made those sorts of contributions, you should probably just be listed as an acknowledged contributor. The first author is typically the person who came up with the idea for the study, who wrote most of the article, who probably did most of the analyses or had the analyses conducted for them. The corresponding author may or may not be the first author. Typically, it may be the research supervisor. In many sciences, and increasingly in psychology, being listed as the last author is actually considered to be as good, if not better, than being listed as the first author. So the first author may be the graduate student who had the idea and who wrote most of the paper, and the last author may be the research supervisor rather than the actual author themselves. You want to avoid both ghost authorship and gift authorship. Ghost authorship would be leaving out people who should be included, who did make a contribution. Gift authorship are people who probably should not be listed as authors. They made a fairly minimal contribution to the paper. Possibly they were a research assistant who ran a few subjects but didn't actually really contribute to the article or to the idea of the paper itself.
Just to interrupt briefly, are there any questions on this already? No? Okay, then we continue. So let's come to the title of your paper. A lot of people, as I said, come up with the title at the very end, just before submitting, very quickly, it will be all right. But actually, the title is very important because this is really what attracts people to read your paper. So take your time and really come up with a good title. And what does it mean, a good title? It means that in the fewest words possible, you describe as accurately as possible what your article is about. And you should avoid things like, abbreviations that people might not recognize, for example. You should make it very short and catchy, but still have all that it needs in it. So really describe what your article is about. And just to give you an example, this is a title from an article we published some time ago, Competition and Men's Face Preferences. What do you think about this title? Is this a good title? I see some heads shaking. Does it tell you what the article is about, you think? Is it catchy? Is it too general? Now, if you read, just take a minute and read what the article was actually about. And then if you compare the actual content of the article with the title, actually it does not really tell, the title actually does not really tell you what the article was about in the end, does it? So this is just one example, and to make the point that do take your time when you come up with your article, because people will judge it the way you have judged this title now.
The key words that you list at the front of your article are really important. They're going to really determine whether people are going to find your article in the first place and whether they're going to read it. So you want to really avoid having keywords that are way too general. Obviously, you're not going to put down psychology or experiment. You also don't want things that are too narrow. You don't want things that nobody's ever going to search for. So an effective approach is to look at the keywords on articles that you yourself have referenced and to choose from those. And another good approach is to, once you've generated your keywords, is to search for them yourselves. Find out, how many hits am I going to get for this particular keyword. It's a really important thing, especially these days. The abstract is quite possibly, the single most important part of your article. Once people have searched and found your article, they're going to find the abstract online through a variety of different online things like PubMed and Medline and so forth. And many people will read the abstract, and that's it. Your abstract has to really grab their attention for them to want to bother to go on and read the entire article. So your abstract is your advertisement for your paper. You want to make it concise, brief, but you want to cover all the highlights, and you want to make it interesting and exciting and grab people's attention. So if they've gotten past the abstract, your introduction is now the next most important part. You want to make sure that people are going to read the introduction, that you're going to really describe carefully and clearly and again as briefly as possible. People tend to go into way more detail in their introductions than they need to. Again, just to repeat that paid does have this 5,000 word limit, which means that the introduction can only be about 2 to 3 printed pages, written pages, I should say. And people tend to go way more detail than they need to in their introduction. You really don't need to go into as much detail as people often think they need to. All you really need to do is to provide a good rationale as to why this is an interesting study, why it should be conducted, and the sorts of issues that you're going to be addressing. So here's just a couple of examples. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but this example is a good one. It does give a good overall picture. It's brief. It tells people what they're going to be doing. It summarizes the current state of the knowledge and indicates how they're going to advance on that. It illustrates what the problems are and what existing solutions there are and what the limitations are of previous research and how they're planning to address those issues. The method section. Are you going to talk about this? Yeah.
So in the method section, it's important that it's written in a way that people can actually reproduce what you have done. And it means that you should be detailed enough. You should reference original publications. And this is actually an important point, because a lot of people reference a method they use from an article, from the last article that used the same method. But instead, you always need to reference the original paper that described that method. In addition to that, you can take a more recent paper that maybe used an adjusted version of the method that you're applying as well. But please always cite the original as well. Otherwise, somebody reading your paper, has to go back steps to find that original method. Of course, if it's something very common, then you can keep it very brief. Describe all measures that you have taken. Describe the research participants as well. Give age range, mean age. I mean, these are very basic things, but if these are missing, then people cannot judge the value of the outcome of your research in the same way. So it's not, it's not to be a pain to you as authors to ask you for all these details, but it's really for the readers to be able to evaluate your results and your research. In the methods part, avoid adding comments and discussion. This is really for later on. And you do use supplementary materials. As Tony said already, journals, for example, paid, but also other journals, can have a limit on how long your article can be, but there's virtually no limit on supplementary materials. So, if somebody is really interested in those details, they can then go there. And in supplementary materials, you can attach basically anything from, an Excel file, your raw data if you want, statistical codes. This is something that we also encourage more and more. Anything that might help to make your methods more detailed. And of course, supplementary material, you can also submit for the results and so on.
So obviously, you all know that experiments on humans and animals have to comply with ethics standards, and there's a variety of different criteria out there, and virtually all, although surprisingly not all, universities have their own ethics committee, and it's important that the authors include in their manuscripts, or at the very least in their letter to the editor when they submit an article, that their study has been approved by the ethics board. Editors will also check to make sure that they think that the study complies with ethics standards, because, as I've said, not everywhere does have an ethics board, or some have ethics boards, but they don't necessarily comply with the standards that we would expect them to. So, actually, we'll skip that slide. So when you're describing your results, it's really a good plan to have good illustrations, tables, figures. They can really tell the story much better than in the text. If you found a three-way interaction and you're trying to describe that in the text, it can be quite complicated. You show me a figure and I can immediately see your three-way interaction. So they're a really good way to present your results. A common error is to duplicate tables in the text. For example, someone will have a nice correlation matrix, and then they'll say something in the text like, as can be seen in table 1, variables x and y correlated 0.42, variables x and z correlated 0.3, variables y and z correlated 0.2. I mean, who cares? You've already shown me the table. I can see those correlations for myself. And you've presented your results. Now you're going to get your discussion. Here's how you're going to really sell what you found. The most common error in discussion sections is simply to repeat the results. You'll say something like, this study was designed to look at relationships between variables x, y, and z. As reported previously, we found that variables x and y correlated 0.42, Don't do that. What we want to know is, why do variables x and y correlate 0.42? Was that in line with what you predicted in your introduction? Was it not in line? Is it consistent with what others have found? don't gloss over or try to disguise results that are inconsistent with previously published results. The editor probably knows about those things. Instead, you want to address why you think you found results that are different from previous results. And you may be making an important new contribution, so that's important to sell that. So again, in the discussion, you want to make sure that you address the things that you referred to in your introduction. Don't suddenly start talking about things that are completely new. I'm saying things that probably sound obvious, but again, I get 1,200 articles a year, and it's surprising to me how often people in their discussion sections will stray way away from where they originally started. They'll start talking about things that he's thinking, what's this got to do with anything? And so it's important that the whole article flows nicely. You've got an introduction, you've stated your hypotheses, your discussion should be strictly focusing on how your results address those hypotheses. You can also have a conclusion section. This may only be a paragraph or so, but here's where you're going to have your specific and global conclusions. How did your results address your specific hypotheses? What are some limitations? What are some future directions that could be looked at? Here's a couple of examples. Again, we'll send you these slides so you can look through, but this is just a good example from PAID. Don't just repeat stuff that was in the abstract, go beyond that.
And well, something that is true for your entire text, be specific. Avoid non-quantitative words like this was low or this was high, it was enormous. This is a bit exaggerating as well, which you should not do. Just give the specific numbers, and then the readers can make their own judgment if this was indeed high or low or enormous. Or when it comes to the references, this is where a lot of mistakes are done. Of course, we have a reference manager that manages the layout of the references, but when it comes to choosing the right references, this is really what you as the author have to do. And here it's important to choose the work that is most relevant for your article, and not to reference your own work, to reference your friend's work because you want to give him a few citations. It should be really the most relevant. Yeah, I see some people smiling in the audience, probably recognizing this. I know that there's the theory and there's the practice, but try to to stick to this. And some journals, as I mentioned, have a limit on how many references you should include. So pay attention to that. Not many do, but pay attention to that. And, well, this is really just a rule of thumb. 30 to 40 references are completely acceptable for full-text articles. Reviews will have more references.
Just as a quick tip, people often ask me whether an exception could be made to PAID's 5,000 word limit, and the answer is no. We're quite strict about that. And one really easy way to cut your word count down is just to eliminate superfluous references. Each reference is going to be 20 odd words or so, so you get rid of 10 references. There you go. You just cut out.
And just to say this word limit, wherever we have it, it's not, again, not to make anybody's life more difficult, but in the end to actually give more value to the article, because nobody will read a very long article. People are not interested and don't have the time. So stick to what is important. Now, as I mentioned already, supplementary material, take advantage of that. And you can submit quite large files. And this is true for us, but for any other publisher as well, I'm sure. So you can include video files, you can include raw data files.
Large correlation matrices.
And we talked a little bit about the typical length of a full article and, as Tony said, the word limits. But in principle, if you stick to, okay, you make it as concise as possible, this should be your first goal. When it comes to the language you're using, most of the journals, all international journals, let's say, are English language. Some tell you if they prefer UK or US spelling, but most of them leave it up to you. The main thing is that you're consistent, so don't swap between UK and US spelling. And, well, just about the language, it goes without saying that it has to be good level of English. This, well, in a field like psychology, there are a lot of English-speaking authors, but there's a good proportion of people who are not native speakers English, like myself, for example. So I know it is more effort, but make sure that the level of English is good. Otherwise, your article might be rejected just because nobody really understands what you're trying to say, and it's the reviewers could not even review it. And my tip as a non-native speaker would be to always have a native speaker check through it before submitting. Abbreviations, as you know, they always have to be defined at the first time of use, unless they are really so well established that everybody would know them. The cover letter is your chance to speak to the editor. It's sort of a job application, if you want. So this is really where you can tell Tony why your article should be published in paid, why it fits the scope, why it's a very important work, and so on. Now, we've told you how to write a good article. This is still not a guarantee that you will get accepted right away, of course. Take your time, write and rewrite your article. Take a break. When you feel you're sick of it, take a day break. I think everybody has experienced this. Take a break and then look at it fresh again. Have other people read it through as well. I mean, for sure you will have your supervisor, but also colleagues of yours, to see if what you try to convey is really perceived this way. And if your angle is right, and if you have the red thread that is consistent. Now, often you will be asked to suggest potential reviewers.
And even if you're not, you should.
It's something very useful for the editor that helps to, increase the number of people who might review your article. Usually you might propose 3 to 6 people. It should be authors in your subject area that are experts. If you are working in an area that is multidisciplinary, you would probably pick people from the different fields to really cover the different aspects. And this is really for your own advantage, because somebody who is absolutely not an expert reviewing this paper will come up with criticism that might not be relevant in the end.
How many of you have ever been invited to do a review? A few. So, suggesting up to 6 reviewers may sound a bit over the top, but unfortunately these days, I send out an invitation to a reviewer and 30 seconds later I get an email back saying this reviewer declines. So it's just so quick, and they may or may not even give a reason as to why they decline. So that's why it's useful for me as the editor to have fallback. I can then send it to reviewer number 4 or reviewer number 5 and so forth. By all means, suggest potential reviewers.
Yeah.
We probably will use them.
Yeah. And just make sure that they are not your neighbor, not the person in the lab next door, not your friends. And there are not really hard rules written down, but normally we say it should not be somebody you collaborated with in the last 3 years. So of course, in a small field, it's difficult to avoid that it's somebody you know. That's okay, but try. It should not be your buddy. And something important about the reviewing process, both as an author but also as a reviewer, if you are invited to review sometime. For authors, it's normally a stressful situation if their article is under review and they feel that it's something a bit negative, but really it's to help improve the work. And in the end, that's normally what happens, I think.
Yeah, in most instances, reviewers are hoping that the article is publishable, and they will go out of their way to try to give you good feedback as to how to improve your paper. I mean, if it's a really bad paper, they will say so, or the editor may not even have sent it out for review in the first place. But if it's a paper that they think is potentially publishable, their comments should be constructive rather than just harshly critical. And it's a learning process. And it's also good for you, because if they come up with things that they think should be fixed, they probably should be fixed. And your paper is going to be better for it. And you're going to feel that you've actually published a better paper in the long run.
And actually, from my personal experience, some of the comments from the reviewers are often things that you knew yourself deep inside. When you submitted, you thought, maybe I should add some more data, but I just give it a shot, and then you get that as a comment.
So the typical peer review process is on this slide. I'll just describe how things happen at PAID. So when you submit an article to PAID, it first goes to my journal manager, who checks it for the word count and then sends it on to me. It comes into my inbox. I'll take a look at it and make a first run decision as to whether or not I think it's appropriate for PAID. I will, on occasion, reject an article out of hand just because it's clearly just not for PAID, and you sort of wonder, why did you submit your article here? But typically it will get past me. I will assign it to one of my 16 associate editors, who in turn will then send it out for review. Before that, once it leaves my inbox, it goes to Sybil Isink, and Sybil is amazing. She reads every single one of the 1,200 articles that are submitted to PAID completely. She copy edits them before they go out for review, and if she thinks that it's poorly written, or if there are references that are incorrect, and that happens a lot. In the text it'll say Smith & Jones 2012, in the references it'll say Smith & Jones 2011. She won't let that go past. She wants to know which one it is. And she'll send it back to the authors if need be to make corrections. She'll also reject quite a few articles out of hand, even if I've already approved them. We have that working arrangement. And she'll just tell the author, sorry, this should go to a developmental journal, this should go to a cross-cultural journal, whatever. If it gets past Sybil, then it goes, yes.
Just for everybody to know, this is a very, very specific service for PAID. Other journals will not correct your references.
That's true.
Like this.
That's true. Yeah, they leave that for the reviewers to pick up on. Yeah.
So make sure you get it right in the first place.
That's right. So, okay. So then it goes to the associate editor, who sends it out to the reviewers. The reviews come back, and at that point it's out of my hands. Now the associate editor has the final say, unless they want to consult with me on a particular paper, but they then make the final decision about reject or do not reject. Increasingly these days, I get emails from authors whose articles have been rejected, pleading their case. I don't mind that. I'll typically refer them to the associate editor who handled it, if I think that they've got a strong case. And on occasion, although it is rare, we will reverse a reject decision if we believe that the author has a good case. You don't want to do what I've actually got an example here from someone who sent me an email saying, literally, please retract your reject decision on my article because it was a silly decision, exclamation mark. That's not going to work. So typically, the typical response will be to revise and resubmit. I think of all the articles I've ever seen, maybe 2 or 3 out of thousands have been accepted as is. It does happen, but it's rare. So the typical decision is revise and resubmit, and you do that. And that's no guarantee that your paper is going to be accepted, although by that point there's a good probability. If you comply with what the reviewers have requested, there's a good chance the paper is going to get in. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much discussed there. There may be major revisions. The paper really needs to be rehashed quite thoroughly. Minor revisions, you just have to do a few little things, maybe run a quick reanalysis. Again, neither of these guarantees acceptance, but by this point, you're probably going to get accepted by the majority.
One thing about major revisions. If you get the comment major revision and you get a time frame, please resubmit within the next couple of months, yeah. And you as an author feel, yeah, but you will actually need more time because you have another grant application that really needs to be done in the next 2 weeks, and you will not be able to, comply with this timeline that you've gotten. It's no problem to tell that. You just have to be open about it. Just tell the editor, I will resubmit, but please for now, I withdraw my manuscript and I will resubmit it as a new manuscript. And if you do that, please always make sure to give the original manuscript number, because then we see directly, oh yeah, this was this manuscript, and we go from there rather than starting at the beginning again.
Yeah, good point. So when you do resubmit your article, please provide a really thorough cover letter along with it. So you want to cut and paste each of the reviewer's comments one by one and how you've responded to the reviewer's comments. If you disagree with the reviewer's suggestions, that's okay, but you will need to provide the editor with a really clear rationale as to why you believe that the reviewer was incorrect. And it happens. I mean, reviewers are fallible. They don't necessarily get it right every time. The worst case scenario is when reviewer 1 says the authors have to do X, and reviewer 2 says the authors have to do Y, and X and Y are the opposite. Again, that's your chance now to tell the editor which of those, if either, you think is the correct one and why, and the editor will take that into account.
Something important for you as an author to know is that you have a lot of rights with your article when it's finished. A lot of people think, okay, but then it's, in a journal, it belongs to the journal, I cannot do anything with it anymore. That's not true. So that's why I actually put in this slide, because I often get questions on that. So, well, this is just a list of some of the things you can, of course, be doing with your own article in the final version, which is, make copies, distribute to colleagues, talk about it and distribute at a conference, for example, where you present a poster on the same topic, those kind of things. And if you want to see a full list, just look online. You will find a similar link for other publishers as well. And when if your work was funded by, for example, let's say NIH or other big funding bodies, there are also certain agreements with publishers like Elsevier that allow, for example, for the posting on different servers, or the PubMed NIH-sponsored work, for example, is automatically posted on PubMed Central. So, it's good for you to be aware of those things. And when it comes to funding bodies, they also require you to have certain things like, for example, the PubMed Central posting. So that's also something you should be aware of. Otherwise, you get problems with the funders. Now, you have rights, but you also have responsibilities as an author. And this is a topic that is not so much fun, publication ethics, but it is unfortunately very real, a real problem. And when I myself moved from being a researcher to becoming a publisher, this was probably the biggest shock for me, to see how much is happening that is really not okay, and that you think, but how is it possible? People must know it's not okay to publish the same text twice with a different title. It still happens. But this is also something where the modern technology works to our advantage. It's much easier to detect those kind of things, particularly when it comes to plagiarism. And so don't do it. That's, I guess, the main takeaway message. There are international scientific ethics standards. Different publishers, different editors, different journals work together to resolve cases whenever we come across something. Now, what are actually the different problems? Well, there's scientific misconduct, which is simply making up results, tweaking results. This is something that happens at your lab, at your university. This is something that is very, very difficult for us as a publisher or as a journal to find out. So, you know, please, if you notice something strange happening, do raise your hand and talk to your supervisor or somebody at your university. Because, you know, if those false results are being published, and they might well be published because it's impossible for us to look at the raw data of every article. You know, there are other people that build their research on those false results. So, yeah, it's really, really horrible also for the reputation, of course, of the field. Now, and then there's publication misconduct, which is, you know, more what we can do something about. There's plagiarism, so taking text and republishing the same text, the same results, the same data in another article. And it can range from, you know, copy-pasting a paragraph to really republishing the entire article just with different authors or different title. There's self-plagiarism, which means that authors take their own work and republish, and there's plagiarism by other people as well. There are duplicate publications, which are really the identical papers with the same title, same authors, and duplicate submissions, which you already mentioned. Don't do it. We get all kinds of excuses whenever we come across something like this. Oh yeah, but my grandmother played with my computer and happened to submit it twice. It's like, okay, we don't care. We don't believe it, but we don't care. It's not okay to do it. You always have to make sure that when you cite some data that have previously been published, please give the reference. And yeah, we already talked a little bit about the authorship. Make sure that the appropriate authors are on the paper. And if there's any conflict of interest, disclose it. That's all. It's okay that there is a conflict of interest. You know, there are, well, I used to work in the pharmacology field, where it's much more common that, you know, there are authors that work at pharma industry. There are studies that are sponsored by by pharma industry. That's how it works. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's out in the open and everybody knows about it. So just disclose any conflicts of interest. And well, just to give an example of what happens if there is a problem with an article, and well, this is a quite famous man, now famous for things he probably did not want to be famous for at the beginning of his career. Diederik Stapel, I'm sure you've all heard the name. So this is one of his papers that is still online, but it's watermarked retracted with a retraction note that describes why this article has been retracted. So that's important for everybody to know. If there's a plagiarizing article or an article with fabricated data, this will not just be removed and disappear and nobody ever knew about it. It will remain, in our case on Science Direct or whatever the platform is, it will be marked as retracted and it will have noticed why it is retracted. And might well have a link to other articles that relate to it that also have been retracted. And that's where the collaboration with different journals and different publishers comes in. And well, this is a message from an author, a plagiarizing author in this case, who really, for him, his career was basically over after we had to retract his article. And also to say, normally, if we find one, there are more articles. So, you know, it's always just an iceberg. And this man says, I deeply regret the inconvenience caused. I'm facing a lot of difficulties in my personal life, and I have decided not to publish any of my work in the future. And you know, I know cases where people, they lost their PhD titles, people lost their jobs. Their career is basically over. And you know, then it always depends on the employing institution. We also communicate with them when it's bigger cases, not for, you know, somebody who copy-pasted a paragraph, but if there's really a bigger problem, then we are definitely involving the universities and normally they set up an ethics committee investigating this case and then come to a decision. Now, this was a little bit depressing, maybe. So I don't want to end on that. I want to end on a more positive note. So thank you very much for your attention, and please